The job offer reached me on a Tuesday afternoon, buried between ordinary emails, as if it didn't know it was about to change my life. Live-in nanny, 2 infants, recently widowed mother. The pay was generous enough to make me suspicious. The address led to a quiet suburb outside Boston, the kind of place where grief hides behind manicured hedges and closed curtains. I told myself I was saying yes for stability. I didn't admit that something in the wording felt personal, almost deliberate. When I arrived, the house greeted me with a stillness that felt rehearsed. The twins were asleep, impossibly small, their room smelling of clean cotton and new beginnings. And then there was their mother, Samantha. She shook my hand like she was negotiating with herself, polite, distant, controlled. Her black dress fit too well for someone who claimed not to care about appearances. Her eyes avoided mine, as if eye contact carried risks she wasn't ready to take. The days fell into rhythm quickly. Feedings, naps, the quiet choreography of caring for lives that depended on precision. Samantha watched from a distance, always nearby, never fully present. Sometimes I'd feel her gaze on me as I soothed one of the babies, like she was memorizing how safety looked when it wasn't hers. I'm Barbara, I reminded myself. The nanny. Temporary. Replaceable. But the house didn't feel temporary. It felt like a place holding its breath. One night, during a storm that rattled the windows and swallowed the streetlights, I found Samantha in the kitchen, gripping the counter as if it were the only solid thing left. She wasn't crying. She was resisting it. When she looked up at me, the composure finally slipped, and fear showed through, raw and unguarded. "There's something you should know," she said. "Something I've never told anyone." My chest tightened. I understood then. The salary wasn't generosity. It was protection. She didn't tell me the secret that night, but the way she looked at me, like she was standing at the edge of something dangerous and familiar, told me enough. This wasn't just a job, and whatever Samantha had buried years ago was already awake and watching me step closer. If this beginning stirred something in you, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read everyone. I learned the house before I learned Samantha. That was the rule I didn't know I was following. The stairs that creaked on the 3rd step, the way the afternoon light slid across the living room floor at exactly 4, the soft click the nursery door made when it didn't close all the way. I learned where the twins liked to be held, and how long I could let them cry before it meant hunger instead of sleep. I learned the rhythm of the place, because rhythm felt safer than people. Samantha moved through the house like someone careful not to disturb evidence. She kept her voice low, her gestures economical, her presence precise. Grief hadn't made her fragile, it had made her exact. Everything in her life appeared managed, curated, contained. But grief doesn't disappear just because it's organized. It waits. Our conversations stayed practical. Feeding schedules, pediatrician appointments, which bottles went in which cabinet. She never lingered in the nursery, never sat in the rocking chair. She stood by the door, hands folded, watching me do the things she trusted me to do, but couldn't bring herself to witness for too long. Sometimes I wondered if it hurt more to stay or to leave. At night, after the twins were asleep, the house changed. The silence grew heavier, less neutral. I could feel it pressing in, especially when Samantha retreated to her bedroom and the lights dimmed one by one. That was when I realized how much of the job wasn't written in the contract. I wasn't just caring for babies. I was absorbing a life that had cracked and never fully settled back into place. One evening, about 10 days in, I heard her crying for the first time. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of sound you make when you don't expect anyone to hear you. I froze at the end of the hallway, unsure whether to move closer or pretend I hadn't noticed. The twins were asleep. There was no professional reason to intervene, but there was something deeply human pulling at me. I didn't knock. I just stood there until she noticed me. Samantha wiped her face quickly, embarrassed more by the interruption than the tears. "I'm fine," she said, automatically, We both knew it wasn't true, but we let the lie pass between us, thin and convenient. That night, we sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table with mugs of untouched tea. The conversation stayed on safe ground: weather, exhaustion, logistics. But the silence between sentences felt charged, like something unsaid was pacing just outside the room. "You don't have to stay forever," she said suddenly, eyes fixed on her cup. The comment caught me off guard. "I know," I replied. "I'm here because you asked." She nodded slowly. I don't want you to feel trapped." The word landed heavier than she intended. Trapped. It lingered in the air, echoing with meanings that had nothing to do with employment. I wondered if that was how she felt in her own life, surrounded by responsibility, protected by structure, quietly suffocating. The next morning, Boston woke under a gray sky, the kind that turns the city inward. I took the twins out for a walk, bundled and quiet, and when I returned, I found Samantha standing at the window, watching the street like she was waiting for something that never arrived. She turned when she heard me, her expression unreadable. "You're good with them," she said. I smiled, unsure how to respond. Compliments from her felt rare, deliberate, earned. "It's easy to be good with people who don't pretend," I said before I could stop myself. She looked at me then, really looked. For a second, the careful distance cracked. Something old and sharp flickered across her face. Recognition. Fear. Maybe both. That was the moment I understood this job would change me. Not because of the babies, but because of the woman standing in front of me, holding herself together with discipline and silence, terrified of what might happen if she let herself feel too much again, and I was already closer than either of us had planned. The first time Samantha smiled at me, it felt accidental, like a reflex she hadn't meant to show. It happened on a quiet morning, the kind that feels suspended between night feedings and the rest of the world waking up. One of the twins had fallen asleep on my shoulder, warm and heavy, his breath slowing against my collarbone. Samantha stood across the room, arms crossed, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. When the baby shifted and made a soft sound, she smiled. Just for a second. Then she caught herself and looked away. I didn't say anything. Some moments feel fragile enough to break if you name them. Our days settled into something almost gentle. Samantha began staying in the same room longer, sometimes sitting at the edge of the couch while I fed the twins, sometimes asking small questions that had nothing to do with logistics. Where I'd grown up, how long I'd been doing this work, whether I liked living in cities or quieter places. She listened closely, like she was collecting pieces of me without knowing why. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way she touched the babies, only when she was sure no one was watching. How she washed her hands longer than necessary, as if trying to rinse off thoughts instead of germs. The faint pause before she said my name, Barbara, as though it carried weight she hadn't agreed to hold. One afternoon while the twins napped, Samantha asked if I could join her for a walk, not with the stroller, just us. The request felt significant, though she said it casually, like an afterthought. Outside, the air was cold and clean, the sidewalk still damp from melting snow. We walked without speaking at first, our steps falling into sync. "I don't usually do this," she said eventually. "Walk?" I asked lightly. "Invite people into my quiet," she corrected. I nodded, understanding more than she realized. Silence can be a form of control, a way to make sure nothing unexpected slips in. We passed a small park where children were playing, their laughter sharp against the winter air. Samantha slowed, her gaze lingering too long. "I thought I knew what my life would look like," she said. "I thought if I followed the right order, everything would make sense." "And did it?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady but distant, for a while. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of the twins, but because I kept replaying the way Samantha had looked at the park, like she was grieving more than one version of herself. I wondered what parts of her life had been chosen, and which had simply happened to her. The shift between us became subtle, but unmistakable. She started knocking on the open door of my room instead of calling my name down the hall. She lingered when we spoke, as if the conversation had edges she wasn't ready to leave. Once, when our hands brushed while reaching for the same mug in the kitchen, Neither of us moved away immediately. The contact was brief, but it stayed with me far longer than it should have. I told myself I was imagining it. That intimacy grows easily in shared grief and shared responsibility. That I was projecting something onto a woman who had just lost her husband and was raising infants alone. Professional boundaries, I reminded myself. Clarity. Distance. But clarity doesn't explain the way her voice softened when she said my name, or the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, or the tension that settled between us. Quiet, restrained, unmistakably alive. By the end of the second week, one thing was clear. Whatever Samantha was holding back wasn't fading with time, it was waiting. The line was crossed on a night that didn't ask for permission. One of the twins wouldn't settle, his crying thin and relentless, cutting through the quiet house well past midnight. I paced the nursery, rocking him until my arms ached, whispering whatever came to mind just to keep my voice steady. When the door opened behind me, I didn't turn. I already knew it was Samantha. Her presence had become something I recognized before sound. "Let me," she said softly. I hesitated for only a second before handing the baby to her. She held him awkwardly at first, fear flickering across her face. Then instinct took over. His cries slowed, faded, stopped. Samantha exhaled, long and unguarded, as if she'd been holding her breath for months. "I forget sometimes," she whispered, "that I'm still capable. You don't forget," I said quietly. "You're just afraid to remember." She didn't deny it. When she placed the baby back in the crib, her fingers brushed mine and didn't move away. The contact was deliberate now, charged. She looked at me, really looked, and the composure she wore so carefully finally fell apart. "I'm scared of you," she said. "Why?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Because when you're near me," she said slowly, "I feel the same way I did once, and loving like that cost me everything." The air between us tightened. I didn't step back. "You loved a woman before," I said, not as a question. Her eyes widened slightly, then she nodded. "And she died." Silence settled, heavy and real. "I won't survive losing someone like that again," she continued, "especially not you." I reached for her then, cupping her face, grounding her instead of rescuing her. "You're not losing me tonight," I said. "You're choosing me." That was all it took. She kissed me like she'd been holding herself back for years, not careful, not polite, honest. The kind of kiss that admits need without apology. I kissed her back just as openly, just as fully. And when she pulled me toward her bedroom, I followed without hesitation. There was nothing rushed about what happened next. We undressed each other slowly, reverently, learning skin that had been denied for too long. Making love to Samantha wasn't about urgency or escape. It was about recognition, about allowing herself to feel pleasure without punishment, about letting another woman touch her without fear. Afterward, we lay together in the quiet, bodies close, breathing synced, the reality of what we'd done settling in without regret. Samantha didn't retreat. She didn't apologize. She stayed pressed against me, her hand resting on my chest, like she needed to feel my heartbeat to believe I was real. "I haven't let myself do that since her," she said softly. I didn't answer with reassurance or promises. I just kissed her shoulder and held her tighter. From the nursery came the faint sound of a baby stirring, then settling again, life moving forward. Samantha listened and didn't flinch. She stayed with me, and in that stillness, it became clear. This wasn't a mistake. It was a beginning she had been denying herself for years. Mourning didn't undo what we'd done. That was the first thing I noticed when I woke up. Samantha was still there, her arm heavy across my waist, her breath warm against my neck. There was no scrambling for clothes, no sudden distance, no pretense of professionalism. Just the quiet aftermath of a choice neither of us was pretending hadn't been made. She woke before I did, and stayed still, as if she were afraid that moving might break something. When I opened my eyes, she was watching me, not with regret, but with a careful kind of awe. "I didn't dream it," she said softly. "No," I answered, "you didn't." We moved through the morning differently. Not awkwardly, intentionally. There was coffee in the kitchen while the twins slept a little longer than usual. Sunlight spilling across the counter. Samantha leaned against the island, closer than before, her fingers brushing mine when she reached for a mug. Small contact, quiet confirmation, but beneath it all, I felt the weight of what hadn't been said yet. It came later, when the house settled again and the twins napped side by side. Samantha asked me to sit with her in the living room, her posture rigid, hands clasped like she was about to deliver bad news. "I need to tell you about her," she said. I didn't ask who. Her name was Elena. They had met in college, in a time when loving another woman wasn't something Samantha felt allowed to do out loud. What they shared lived in stolen hours and borrowed spaces. Glances held too long, hands brushing in crowded rooms, kisses hidden behind locked doors. It had been intense, reckless, alive. "She was the bravest person I knew," Samantha said, her voice steady but thin. "And I was the coward." Elena had wanted a life that didn't require hiding. Samantha hadn't been ready. And then, suddenly, there was no more time to decide. An accident, a phone call, an ending that arrived without negotiation. "I learned something from that loss," Samantha continued. "That loving like that means losing like that." So I stopped. She built a life that looked right from the outside, married a good man, did what was expected. When he died, the grief felt different. Not shallow, but incomplete. The pain she carried wasn't only for him. It was for the part of herself she'd buried along with Elena. "I don't regret my children," she said quickly, eyes meeting mine. "But I regret the way I lived. I regret choosing safety over truth." Her voice faltered then. "And now you're here, and I feel it again. The same depth, the same danger." I reached for her hand. She held on tightly, like she was afraid I might disappear mid-confession. "I can't go through that kind of loss again, Barbara," she said. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." I didn't promise her forever. I didn't tell her nothing bad would happen. "I'm not Elena," I said gently, "and you're not the woman you were back then." She nodded, tears finally spilling. Not dramatic, honest. The fear didn't disappear after that conversation. It settled between us, quieter, but more real. Loving me meant reopening a wound she'd spent years stitching closed. And loving her meant understanding that every step forward would carry the echo of someone she'd lost once, and was terrified of losing again. That night, when we went to bed together, Samantha held me like someone guarding a fragile truth. And for the first time, I understood the real obstacle between us wasn't the world. It was the memory of a love that had taught her how much it could hurt. By the end of that week, the house no longer belonged to just one version of Samantha. Something had shifted in the way she moved through rooms, in how she spoke, in the quiet confidence that replaced the rigid control she once wore like armor. She still carried her fear, but it no longer dictated every decision. Now, it followed us instead, close enough to be felt, not close enough to stop us. We didn't announce anything. There was no conversation where we labeled what we were doing, but we stopped pretending it wasn't happening. She started touching me without hesitation, her hand at my lower back when she passed behind me, her fingers brushing my wrist when she wanted my attention. At night, we slept together openly, not hidden behind closed doors and guilt, but with the quiet certainty of two adults choosing each other again and again. The twins noticed before anyone else. They calmed faster when Samantha entered the room. They watched her more closely, responding to a warmth she had denied herself before. She laughed more easily with them now, a sound that surprised even her. Sometimes I caught her staring at them with something like wonder, as if she were finally allowing herself to inhabit her own life. But the world outside the house didn't pause for our clarity. It arrived in the form of her sister, Margaret, who came by unannounced one afternoon with a bag of groceries and questions she didn't bother disguising. She noticed the way Samantha and I moved around each other, too synchronized, too intimate. The way I didn't step aside when Samantha entered a room, the way Samantha didn't ask me to. Margaret's gaze lingered, calculating, concerned. That evening, after she left, Samantha was quiet again. The old tension crept back into her shoulders, her words more careful, her touch hesitant. "She'll figure it out," Samantha said eventually. "And does that scare you?" I asked. She nodded. "Not because of her. Because once it's seen, it's real." "It's already real," I said. She looked at me then, conflicted. "I know, and that's exactly the problem." That night, when we made love, Samantha held herself back for the first time since we'd started. Not physically, but emotionally. I felt it in the way she didn't fully relax, and how her breath caught like she was bracing for impact. Afterward, she lay awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "that the moment I let myself be happy is the moment something will take you away from me." I turned toward her. "You're punishing yourself in advance." "I'm protecting myself," she replied. "No," I said gently. "You're reliving Elena." The name hung between us, undeniable now. She closed her eyes. "I don't know how to love without expecting loss." I kissed her temple, steady, present. "Then we learn," I said, "together." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. Outside, the city lights glowed through the windows, indifferent and constant. Inside the house, Samantha lay beside me, caught between the woman she had been, the woman she lost, and the woman she was becoming. And for the first time since I had arrived, I understood that loving her wouldn't just mean being chosen. It would mean standing still long enough to prove I wasn't going anywhere. The distance didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, disguised as caution. Samantha began pulling back in ways so subtle they almost passed for responsibility. She stayed longer at work, took phone calls behind closed doors, asked fewer questions about my day. When we touched, it was still affectionate, but measured, as if she were rationing something precious. I noticed. Of course I did. One evening, after the twins were asleep, I found her in the living room staring at nothing, her phone dark in her hand. She looked up when I entered, already defensive, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. "We need to talk," she said. The words landed exactly where I feared they would. "This isn't sustainable," she continued. "You live here. You work for me. The children." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't turn this into a technical issue." She flinched. "I'm trying to protect everyone." "You're trying to protect yourself," I said, more gently. "From me." She stood, pacing, hands running through her hair. "You don't understand what it's like to lose someone you love and never get answers. One day they exist, the next, nothing." "I do understand loss," I said. "What I don't understand is choosing loneliness because it feels safer." She stopped pacing, looked at me like I'd struck something tender. "I wake up every morning waiting for the moment it all collapses," she confessed. "For the call, the accident, the end. And when I imagine losing you," her voice broke, "I can't breathe." Silence stretched between us, heavy and fragile. "So you'd rather leave me first," I said. She didn't deny it. That night she slept alone, not because we agreed to it, but because fear had finally won around. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, and feeling something dangerously close to regret. Not for loving her, but for letting her decide the ending before it arrived. The next morning, I packed a bag, not to leave permanently, but to make something clear. When Samantha saw it by the door, her face drained of color. "What are you doing?" "I'm choosing myself," I said calmly, "and giving you the chance to choose honestly." "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "I won't be loved halfway, not out of fear." Her eyes filled. "I don't want to lose you." "Then stop acting like loss is inevitable," I said, "or accept that pushing me away guarantees it." I picked up my bag and moved toward the door. She stopped me. Her hand wrapped around my wrist, grounding, desperate, real. "Don't go," she said. Not quietly, not carefully. "I've been rehearsing tragedy my whole life. I don't know how to live without it." I turned to her. "Then let this be the moment you learn." She pulled me into her arms, crying openly now, the kind of crying that doesn't ask to be fixed, only witnessed. I held her, steady, unafraid, letting her feel the thing she'd been avoiding, staying. That night, we slept together again. Not urgently, not desperately, intentionally. And something changed. Not the fear, but who was in control of it. The world didn't rush in all at once. It tested us first. The first time Samantha reached for my hand outside the house, it was almost imperceptible, a brief, deliberate touch in the parking lot of the pediatrician's office. No one was looking. Or maybe people were, and she'd decided it no longer mattered. Her fingers intertwined with mine, firm, unapologetic, and I felt something shift deep in her posture. Not relief, resolve. Inside, she introduced me simply as Barbara, not the nanny, not the caregiver, just my name. It shouldn't have meant as much as it did, but it did. The real test came days later, when Margaret returned. This time, Samantha didn't try to choreograph the visit. She didn't rearrange space to create distance. She didn't correct assumptions with silence. We were sitting on the couch when Margaret walked in, close, familiar, unmistakable. Her eyes flicked between us, then back again. "I see," she said quietly. Samantha didn't let go of my hand. "I'm not explaining myself," she said, calm but unwavering. "I'm just letting you see what's real." Margaret hesitated. "The kids are loved," Samantha replied. "By me, and by her." The room held its breath. Then Margaret nodded slowly, not in agreement but in acceptance. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. Later that night, Samantha sat beside me on the bed, her back against the headboard, staring at the dark window. "I kept thinking I'd have to choose," she said, "between being honest and being a good mother." "You don't," I said. "You're teaching them how to live truthfully." She turned to me then, something lighter in her eyes. I wish someone had taught me that sooner. The next step was harder. It came in the form of an invitation she almost declined, a charity event connected to her late husband's firm. Public. Visible. Full of people who still saw her as the widow. The idea of attending alone felt dishonest now. The idea of bringing me felt terrifying. "I don't want to hide," she said, "but I don't want to make this about spectacle either." "Then don't," I said. "Just walk in with me." We arrived together. No announcement. No scene. Just two women entering the room side by side, moving with quiet certainty. Some people stared. Some pretended not to. A few smiled. Surprised but sincere. Samantha didn't shrink. When someone asked who I was, she answered without hesitation. "My partner." The word settled easily on her tongue, like it had been waiting there. Later in the car, her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the aftermath of courage. "I thought it would feel like losing control," she said. "But it feels like I finally stopped lying." I leaned over and kissed her, slow and grounding. "Welcome to your life," I said. That night, as we put the twins to bed together, Samantha stood in the doorway longer than usual, watching them sleep. "They'll never know a version of me that's pretending," she said. And for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't sound afraid of the future. She sounded ready for it. The call came at the worst possible moment. I was in the nursery, halfway through a bedtime routine, when my phone buzzed on the dresser. I almost ignored it. Nothing good ever arrives late and urgent. When I glanced at the screen and saw Samantha's name, my stomach tightened before I even answered. "Barbara," she said, breathless. "I need you to come. Now." There was no explanation, just fear, raw and unmistakable. I found her in the hospital waiting area, pacing with a rigidity I recognized too well. One of the twins had spiked a fever suddenly. Not dangerous, the doctor would later say, common, manageable. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Samantha was back in the place she'd sworn she'd never return to, the edge of loss. She froze when she saw me, then crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around me without hesitation. No audience awareness, no restraint. "I thought I was losing him," she whispered into my shoulder. "I couldn't think. I needed you." And that was the difference. She hadn't shut down. She hadn't pushed me away. She hadn't tried to face fear alone. She reached for me. We sat together for hours, the kind of waiting that strips everything down to essentials. Samantha's hand never left mine. When the doctor finally reassured us, she cried openly, relief crashing into old trauma she'd never fully processed. Later, in the quiet of the hospital room, she spoke without prompting. "When Elena died," she said softly, eyes fixed on the sleeping baby, "I learned to disappear at the first sign of danger. I thought leaving early would hurt less than staying." She turned to me then, steady despite the tears. "Tonight I stayed. I didn't run." I cupped her face, grounding her in the present. "You chose connection over fear." She nodded. "And it didn't destroy me. That night changed something fundamental." Back home, long after the twins were settled, Samantha sat beside me on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder like it belonged there. No tension, no scanning for the exit. "I don't want to live braced for disaster anymore," she said. "I don't want to love like it's temporary." I kissed her hair. "Then don't." She pulled back just enough to look at me. "Stay," she said, not as fear this time, as intention. And for the first time since Elena, since the life she'd buried, Samantha allowed herself to believe something radical, that love didn't always end in loss. Sometimes, it survived the fear meant to protect it. The future stopped being theoretical the morning the lawyer called. Samantha was in the kitchen when she took it, her posture stiffening in a way I'd learned to recognize. Paperwork, estate matters, the kind of unfinished business that grief postpones until it can't anymore. When she hung up, she didn't speak right away. She stared out the window, jaw set, like she was bracing herself. "They need me to come in," she said finally. "There are things I never dealt with after he died." I nodded. "Do you want me there?" She turned to me, eyes steady. "I need you there." That alone told me everything. The office was all glass and muted colors, designed to feel neutral and authoritative. Samantha listened as they spoke about assets, trusts, expectations, about appearances, about what would be simplest. The word hung in the air like a warning. At one point, the lawyer glanced at me. "And you are?" Samantha didn't hesitate. "My partner." The word still carried weight. It always would. But now it also carried consequence. There was a pause. Not hostile, just recalibrating. Afterward, in the car, Samantha let out a long breath. "I spent years choosing what was easiest for everyone else," she said. "I'm done with that." That decision unfolded quickly after. She told me she wanted to formalize my place in the house, not as an employee, but as family. Not a workaround, not a secret. A choice made in writing.